When Monday rolled around, Laine found herself at the lake with Jerry, where they decided to meet. Even though she got an uncomfortable feeling from him, Laine decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Plus, he was someone to talk to. Jerry was intellectual and worldly, with a wry sense of humor that left her unhinged. That was when she could understand his accent. He didn't sound Irish so much, but not strictly British either. Definitely posh. "Here, this is your inheritance," Jerry said. Laine thought he was joking. Maybe he was poking fun at the inheritance she'd been given after Dad died. They talked about a lot of things when she visited him in Ireland. After Dad died, Mom sold the farm back to Laine's uncles, and it had paid for her trip to Ireland 5 years ago, when she'd first met Jerry. They started walking on the trail at Lake Como near Mom's house in Darby, Montana, pulling out around the bend. "It's an amulet," Jerry said, "to help you on your journey." Laine held the amber beads, but got distracted when she heard laughing and looked at the boat out on the lake. She saw Max, Ashley, and the other R&B employees, all at Lake Como the same day. They were rafting near Wood's cabin. Laine was wearing a dress with a tribal-looking design over her swimsuit top that she'd found in the free pile. It had a white elastic band that tightened over her collarbone. She had curly hair that she sometimes straightened with a flat iron, but for some reason the lake water made it even curlier, like every tendril was a corkscrew. Every part of her stung from the sunburn, which came alive at that moment as she and Jerry inched towards the waterfall. There was a Latin proverb that said, "When the wind is not favorable, take to the oars." The more distance she put between herself and the noise, the more she could envision she was on a different lake, the real Lake Como, perhaps, in Italy, instead of the man-made reservoir in her neck of the woods. For some reason she got an image of people with their stone-age tools of prehistory, trying to cultivate the land and build great empires that would one day collapse, but had to be built nevertheless. One good thing about her wild imagination was it allowed her to see infinite possibilities. The downturn was that it bound her to romantic fantasies that had no real grounding in reality. She tried to avoid her peripheral vision until the noises faded completely. The more distance she put between them, she had to believe she'd find herself into a better place. If Laine could not quench her desire to travel immediately, at least she could talk to Jerry. He was worldly knowledgeable. Little did she know there'd come a time when she'd move away from the house on Roman Hill, and maybe she'd be like Jerry, who knew several languages, helped his community, and had lectured at the universities about bullying even after he'd retired from the archaeology department. Jerry was like Finn McColl in the story about the giant who tasted the salmon of knowledge and gained spiritual wisdom. According to Celtic lore, salmon get their spots from eating the hazelnuts of the 9 hazel trees of wisdom, one of which grows at the source of each of Ireland's main rivers. He had a lot of bullies in the Christian Brothers School growing up, but he'd overcome it. Maybe there'd come a time when Laine too would be recounting the stories of her adolescence in Montana, and she'd have to do some research to remember what had once been so familiar. It was her ability to change her life through her creativity and draw people together globally that would cause the most impact. She didn't know that in time, Dad would be watching her bloom from up above. Her future self was like a series of topographical maps in her mind. She was trying to draw a rough map from who she was to who she was becoming. It was scary and unknown, like flying to a new place for the first time. The astronomer Ptolemy formed his own map, the oldest surviving record of ancient Ireland, and did this without even stepping foot there. He mapped the geological features in a sort of virtual map, and as the forefather of spherical trigonometry. And now she was trying to map out her new life, sensing it had something to do with Italy. Even though the journey she took with her first love turned out to be a dead end, it had made her into a stronger, more enduring person. "Did you know my dad?" Laine asked. "Not well," Jerry said. "I met him when I visited your grandparents at the farm." Jerry was like Laine. He had traveled to the United States as a young man. When he was studying, he even rode the Greyhound, and he had stayed with Grandma and Grandpa back then. Just as Laine had traveled to Ireland and met her relatives. He was completely opposite to Dad, and Laine got the impression by his tone that he didn't think much of Dad. As for her dream of being a writer, it wasn't that she thought it was impossible for her to achieve great things, even write a novel, say. But she had this depression thing that was like a clamp on her mind, that squeezed all the goodness and hope from it. Yet somehow she thought she'd catch her edge, like in the ride at the carnival that Dad never took her to when she was younger. But in her imagination it had been better. What she had dreamed into reality had come from her adversity. "Maybe you could be an anchorite," Jerry said, reminding her some of the monasteries they visited in Ireland together. They curved around the trail. "They live in a little hole sometimes by the side of a church or an abbey, devoting their lives to prayer. They never leave, not even to use the bathroom, and all their needs are met by passerbys who throw in food. Most of them take the pledge of silence, you know," Jerry said. "That sounds good to me," Laine said. She felt like she didn't have much of a voice anyway, thinking about the bully at work. She'd store up her emotions, yet when it got too much, she was like a hot piece of coal flying out of a poked furnace. Or like a gusty wind that broke open the gates and let the horses run flying. And she thought that was another thing she needed to improve: emotional mastery. Jerry moved off trail suddenly with his hand holding aside some branches. Realizing Jerry had stopped, she looked and found him off trail and went over to see. "What is it?" Laine asked, stepping beside him. She saw what looked like a small stone tower she'd never seen before. The materials were as simple and practical as a friar's habit: reddish-brown pebbles, a very sparing use of terracotta and white inlay, adapted to the Franciscan ideal of humility. "Looks like an old altar place. Shall we, madam?" he asked. Laine shrugged, and they walked off trail into the bracken towards a little gateway, a small, rough stone building with a dark hole opening. Jerry ducked in first and Laine followed. They were at the part where the thicket evaporated into a clearing, and she saw the backwards upside-down L across the water on the opposite side of the mountain. "This can be your anchorite hole," Jerry said. "You know, you are charming." No, I'm just me," Laine said, rubbing at her elbow. She started backpedaling out of the altar, or whatever it was. "If I'd have had a daughter, I'd had hoped she'd been like you," Jerry said. "When your mom said you were available," he said, "I was very pleased." Laine backed away completely disgusted and angry towards Mom, feeling as if Mom had tried to fix her up like one of those dowryless daughters of Pride and Prejudice. Mom always seemed to be trying to control her life in a way that maybe she thought would work for her, but for some reason Laine thought she could make her dreams happen. She started to jog backwards, completely on the trail now. Jerry rushed towards her. He watched her silently as she fell. "Jesus," Jerry said. She watched the branches twirl above his face, making his face look older, feebler, like an old shepherd from a fable. Her hair was in the dirt, and her head had smacked against something hard. She felt the raw scrape on her elbow. Mother Mary and Joseph," Jerry said. Thanks for watching my video, guys. I'll be back with another video next Wednesday. Until then, ciao!